Well, hello everyone, and welcome to One Civil Law. And for today's story, we're doing a bit of a wrap up on a story that broke a couple years ago. Some of you may not remember this story, but the story has sort of come to a culmination with its creators being sentenced to massive time in prison. So this all relates to the GirlsDoP channel. For those of you who run in such circles, you might remember this. There was a website called GirlsDoP that featured very young girls, well, of legal age, but college girls, often that were amateurs doing sexual acts, for the camera. And their creators got busted and sued, and now they're going to prison for decades. So let me tell you a little bit about what happened and why, and then we'll read the DOJ report or the DOJ summary of the recent sentencing. So here's what happened basically. The creators of this website, the GirlsDoP website, what they did principally, although not exclusively, what they did principally is they went to college campuses and they hung up flyers that said, are you interested in basically in modeling? Are you interested in basically non-sexualized gigs, right? You're interested in modeling? Are you interested in, being on camera? But nothing that, indicated that it was for pornography, right? And then sometimes on the phone during the call, or apparently not sometimes until they were in Vegas, were they informed of the true purpose of this thing, which was for pornography. Right. So there was basically a fraud. There was basically a deception. So basically it was fraud in the inducement, as we say in contract law. Right. You can't defraud someone into a contract. Right. So there's two kinds of fraud in contract. There's fraud in fact and fraud in the inducement. OK. Fraud in the inducement is I trick you into the contract, but the contract is telling you what it really is. So this would be a classic bait and switch scam, would be like fraud in the inducement. Like I say, oh, I have this wonderful, car. It's really great, and I have one that's for sale and you can buy it, but the car never really exists, right? And then when you come into the lot to buy the car, I'm like, well, wouldn't you know it? I just sold out that car, but I have this other car that's available. And it is what it purports to be, right? That's the key. It is what it inducing you into the sale so that contract is void. And of course, this could be the other way around, right? I trick you into what it is. So and the scenario here would be like, I have this great ad for this great car. It's a special super duper car. You come in to buy the car. It appears to be the car, but it's not the car, right? I have somehow camouflaged it or tricked it or somehow and I know about this, right? Because I'm defrauding you. So I know this is false. And I've somehow in some way made the car appear to be something that it's not. And so you buy it, believing it to be one thing. I know it's not that thing, but I'm not going to tell you, right? So that's fraud in fact, all right? So just to explain the difference, because there was fraud in fact too, which we'll get to in a second, but we'll start with the fraud in the inducement. So these creators or these provocateurs produced their signs saying, modeling opportunities basically, but they weren't really modeling opportunities or they were of a pornographic nature. And sometimes they told the people on the phone and sometimes they didn't tell them until they got to Vegas and then they revealed the truth, right? And then basically once they got to Vegas, they said basically things like, well, if you don't do it, we won't pay for your return flight, right? So basically kind of extort them into doing it, right? It's like, we're not going to pay for a return flight unless you do it. And then a lot of times they got them absolutely high and or drunk in reviewing the contract. They got them completely drunk. So basically, and high. To basically, corrupt their ability to consent. And also, on top of everything, as if this wasn't enough, the really big fraud in fact, right? The big fraud in fact element of the whole thing was that they were told, what they were told orally is that these created works would be only for a private collector. I think they were told someone in Austria, not that it really matters, but they were told that these works were just for someone's private spank bank somewhere, some private well-to-do guy in Europe or whatever, wanted these for his private. This guy didn't exist, by the way. It wasn't like the guy got it and then he released it, which might have been a reasonable foreseeable risk, right? If you thought about it, right? Well, what's to guarantee this guy's going to keep it in his private collection? But the guy never existed in the first place. He wasn't real. They took it and they just immediately published on the internet, like immediately right away. Now, the contract itself, gave unlimited distribution rights. But again, they were defrauded because they were told it would be kept into it. And that's a fraud in fact. And also they were high and drunk. And so even if it was in the contract, they were high and drunk and couldn't read the contract because they were dry and drunk. And also they were being extorted because if you don't do it, we won't give you your return ticket and so forth and so on. Okay. So basically the girls were tricked, defrauded, and it was bad at basically every single level. That was the GirlsDoP prawn scandal from a few years back. Okay, so eventually this all blew up in their face a couple years ago, and the creators went on the run. Like literally, they went on the run from the law, and of course the lawsuits went flying, and eventually the girls won their lawsuit, and part of their victory was to obtain the copyrights on the works that were created, which then as the copyright holder, then they could send out copyright cease and desist notices, right? Should they pop up again, because now they own the copyright, so they can DMCA it, because that was part of their judgment, right? So the girls got the copyright to the work. And then of course, the feds also wanted a word with them relating to this whole thing. And the feds wish to have a word with them has culminated. And we're going to discuss how that all came to an end. Yeah, they tried to trap them in the room, would be considered kidnapping. Don't worry, we're going to get there. The GirlsDoP prawn owner, and one of them at that, we'll get to the rest of them, Michael Pratt, was sentenced to 27 years for the sex trafficking. So yeah, it didn't end well. It didn't end well for the creators of. They did many illegal bads, as I've sort of tried to highlight, at least in the brief retelling of the story. And they did it to multiple different girls repeatedly. And so, there was that. And so our protagonist over here gets 27 years in federal prison. So that's super exciting. Let's read this summary from our friends at the DOJ. The DOJ would like to tell you a little bit about how this all panned out. So let's read this summary from the DOJ. Michael Pratt, the mastermind of the sprawling GirlsDoP prawn sex trafficking empire, was sentenced in federal court today, this is yesterday, I believe, to 27 years in prison for orchestrating the scheme that deceived and exploited hundreds of women and left a trail of broken lives. As I mentioned, it wasn't just like a one-time thing. It wasn't just like one girl. They did it a lot. They did it to a lot of girls. I'm not necessarily saying that every single girl was deceived. Before, I can't speak to that. So it's possible that some girls knew fully what the deal was and wanted to do it. Maybe that's true. I don't know. I haven't looked into the finer details of the case. They did it to a lot of people though. So maybe there were some girls that were totally cool with this plan. Don't know. What I do know is that there was a lot of deception. And so, that's a lot of problem. Yeah. Pratt, who was the owner and operator of the GirlsDoP prawn and the GirlsDoP Toys website, built the multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise by luring young women into pornography through the lies, like the false flyers, coercion, like, do it or we won't pay for your return flight, with the drugs and the alcohol, and manipulation, such as, don't worry, this is only for some private collector somewhere, it will never see the light of day, and then immediately posting it online. And then, of course, broadcasting the whole thing online. And the girls got paid something like $2,000 per, I believe, or at least one girl did that I saw. I'm not sure if they all got paid that, but at least one girl got paid $2,000, so, yeah. At the hearing, to hand down the maximum sentence, I don't know if a transcript of that is available. If it is, I'd love to read it sometime because that could be interesting / disturbing. If there is a transcript, it's not going to be available for a couple months though, because they don't release those right away. Anyways, 40 women urged the court to hand down the maximum sentence, some tearfully describing their ordeals in the San Diego hotel room where they were exploited, coerced, raped, and, again, when you're thinking about rape, of course, you have to think about consent. And when you have to think about consent, you have to think about, are they capable of consent? And at least in some cases, the girls were quite deliberately alcohol and drugged, not necessarily with roofies, but with other drugs, to the point where, their ability to consent was compromised, if not non-existent. So it is quite possible that some of them were legally raped on top of everything else. Yeah. Abused and trapped. Some talked about the aftermath of the trauma that included many years of suicide attempts. I bet it did. Diagnosis, depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Lost jobs and relationships. Stalkers, threats, and harassment, and the heavy burn of shame and fear they still carry. Yeah, I mean, that's, your film is on the internet for all of time, right? So it's like you'll never fully escape that. And so that's bad. Now, it's pretty hard to find this material these days because they own the copyright and the DMCA everything. But, I'm sure it exists in the darker corners of the internet. The internet never forgets and so forth and so on. All right. Some told of having cosmetic surgery to alter their appearance. Some testified they changed their name. Others spoke of substance abuse and alcoholism. One, she had a glass of wine for breakfast just to make it to court. Most of the victims were 18 to 21 years old when they were exploited, college students, as I said. That was their big market, right? They went to college campuses and posted the flyers. They might have gotten women beyond that, but that was their big market. So, yeah. Leading modeling ads, as I sort of mentioned earlier, preyed on vulnerable women and promised their sex videos would never be seen online. And more specifically, as I mentioned earlier, that they would only be kept in the private hands of some private collector. I want to say in Eastern Europe, blah, blah, blah. But of course, the collector never existed. But that was what they were told, right? Some Eastern European guy just wanted it in their private spank bank for some reason. But the guy never existed, so it doesn't really matter. But, In reality, of course, the employees posted the videos on the websites basically immediately, which featured young women appearing in their first pornographic videos and even promoting them on free pornographic platforms like Pornhub to drive traffic. Victims who were coerced into finishing shoots under threats of lawsuits, canceled flights, and exposure. As I mentioned, right? So it's like, I don't make this stuff up. Like I remember reading, I actually haven't read this press release. I just remember reading a lot of this stuff from the earlier lawsuits. When the whole copyright issues were being, fought over, a couple of years ago, because the civil stuff happened a while back. So I remember reading a lot of these details from the civil lawsuit. It was like, yeah, they were threatened with, we're not going to cancel your flight, or, we'll sue you for breach of contract, or, we're going to leak the tapes. This is before, by the way, revenge porn laws were really a thing. So this is a couple years back. So I don't think revenge porn laws were a thing yet. So there's that too. Some were effectively trapped in the hotel by camera equipment blocking the exits, therefore kidnapping. One woman said, Pratt caused me to fear my own name. Another woman said the life I was meant to have died in that hotel room. Another said profit over people, cruelty over humanity. Many spoke directly to Pratt. One woman saying, I'm not your victim, I'm your reckoning. I'm the girl who took you down, said the victim who was a 21-year-old law student at the time. Look around, we're an army of survivors sharing our truth in one. I'd love to read these transcripts. I hope that they are available sometime because I'd like to read these stories so I can better understand, exactly what these women went through. I mean, I understand the basics and I read the summaries of it, but to actually see these stories, it would be very interesting. Okay. Another woman who's 19-year-old dance teacher to children but was fired told Pratt, you're evil, you're a predator, you're a rapist, at least in some cases he was. That's who you are. Your ego was too big to believe you'd ever be caught, but karma comes around. It's your turn now to suffer. Fair. A woman who's 21 years old, college student studying to become a teacher, said the crime dismantled my identity. I lost my voice and sense of safety. The shame and despair was unbearable. Another woman who was a college-bound high school senior but dropped out because of the ordeal says, this was theft of my identity, my safety, my dreams, and peace. Yep. After hearing about 5 hours of testimony, the district judge told defendant his position as the leader, organizer, and mastermind of a massive trafficking organization, which, it's trafficking, right? The short definition of trafficking is when you're transporting people across state lines not necessarily across state lines because you can have state level trafficking, but when you're transporting people for the purpose of sex with the coercion. right? That's the short definition of trafficking. You're transporting them for the purpose of sex with the coercion. And that coercion, of course, can come at any stage of that. So it can come before, during, or after, as it was. And so, yeah, he did a little bit of the trafficking. Compelled her to add time to the sentence. I've been doing this a very long time and never seen a case like this or this magnitude. The sheer scope and magnitude of the offense caused this court to vary upward. So the court, unsurprisingly, varied upward from the sentencing guidelines because, I mean, these people did it to hundreds of women. And at least 40 of them testified. There were like 600 women or something who were involved in this. Now, I can't say again that every single one of them was coerced or tricked. It's possible some of them were consenting, willing, and aware of what was going on. Don't know. It's possible. But, you know, a couple hundred women were tricked, even if there are a few out there who knew what was going on. Because I remember reading lawsuits, and also they've been convicted. So there's that. Throughout the conspiracy, Girls Do Prawn and Girls Do Toys received millions of views. To promote with websites, videos content from both sites was posted on Pornhub. The videos from Girls Do Porn and Girls Do Toys posted on Pornhub were viewed by millions. The website charged visitors their websites, their personal websites, charged visitors a subscription fee to access content and generated millions of dollars in revenue. Exciting. All right. To recruit the young women who appeared in videos, Pratt and some of his employees often told the prospective models their sex videos would never be posted online. Again, the Eastern European collector, as memory serves. The videos would never be released in the United States, and no one who knew the women would ever find out about the video. And of course, importantly, representations they knew to be false, right? So if it was true that it was just to be given to some collector, and then the collector released the videos, right? That wouldn't be fraud because they didn't know. But the collector never existed, right? That's the thing. They knew it to be a lie. They knew it was a lie when they said it. And they were saying it for the purpose of inducing them to do a thing, which is fraud. When you lie, do a thing, it's the fraud. Yeah, fraud in the inducement and fraud in fact, both. Exciting. I guess it's mostly fraud in the inducement, to be honest. Fraud in fact would be if they were tricked into like the actual sex. Would be fraud in fact. I don't know if there was any fraud in fact, now that I think about it. Because for it to be fraud in fact, it would have to be like they were told that they would have sex with one person, but it was a different person or something. They'd have to be lied to about what it actually is. I don't know if there's any fraud in fact now that I think about it. There might not be. A lot of fraud in the inducement, though. Incidentally, by the way, not that we care, but fraud, as long as we're here to learn something legally, fraud in the inducement alone isn't sufficient to do rape. It's one of those weird caveats of law, as long as we're here to learn something. So normal contracts are void for fraud in the inducement or fraud in fact, but to the extent that you view sexual relationships as a contract, which, you know, I guess you could view because you're both exchanging something that you didn't otherwise have to give. So I suppose you could view it as a contract, right? I'm giving something, you're giving something. So we're both giving consideration. So to the extent you want to view sex as a contract, right, then sex cannot be voided for fraud in the inducement. Because fraud and inducement is basically just being tricked into the sex, which, you know, to be honest, happens basically at every bar every night, you know, because it's like, you know, I'm really a millionaire. I'm an astronaut. You know, I'm a fighter pilot or whatever it is, right? So, yeah, fraud in the inducement doesn't get you to rape, in case we care. Fraud in fact will, though, if you trick them into what it is. So, like, for example, anyone who remembers the movie Revenge of the Nerds? In Revenge of the Nerds, one of the nerds, and I don't know why this was supposed to be like done for comedic effect back when this movie was filmed, but never mind. One of the nerds puts on like a Darth Vader kind of mask and has sex with one believes the nerd to be the jock. And the nerd knows that. Like he's trying to trick her, right? So that would be an example of fraud in fact, because I think I'm having sex with person X, but I'm in fact having sex with person Y. But I didn't know that. And so I was tricked, and that would be fraud in fact, and that's rape. But fraud and inducement isn't normally enough for rape. What's doing the rape here, by the way, is not the fraud and the inducement. What's doing the rape here is the drugs, the alcohol, the obliteration of consent. That would be the nature of the rape because of, all the things I just mentioned. All right. Anyways, pressing on. Even after Pratt learned the victims' names and personal details were being doxed on pornwikileaks.com, which is a site that no longer exists, he pressed forward with his scheme, reaping millions in profit while ignoring desperate pleas from women to take the videos down, which isn't great. According to the U.S. attorney, Pratt was a calculating and cruel predator. He lured young victims, caused others to abuse them on video, and taunted them for years as they sought to reclaim their names. That's nice. Afterwards, these victims suffered each day the cruelty of the internet and social media. As one victim said today, Pratt caused me to fear my own name. We as a society failed these women. They are forced to walk alone. But today, as they confronted Pratt, they personified courage and grace. They showed everyone what should have been apparent when they were first victimized. They don't need society's forgiveness. We need theirs. Pratt eventually pled guilty, incidentally, because the alternative was worse. Pratt admittedly engaged in a conspiracy to commit sex trafficking by force, fraud, and coercion. Yeah, he did that, making millions off a desperate, deliberate, and reprehensible scheme showing no regard for suffering, said the special agent in charge. At his direction, Pratt and his co-conspirators manipulated women into participating in the pornographic videos and then bullied, lied, or threatened them when they tried to leave. Yep, they did that with the, I'm not going to pay for your flights, I'm going to sue you because of the equipment and time and blah. Yeah, they did all those things. He then cowardly fled the country and attempted to avoid prosecution, but, not so much. But the FBI and domestic and foreign law enforcement were determined to hold Pratt accountable for the harm he inflicted, and today's sentence reflects the persistence. The investigation and prosecution spanned years, yes, it certainly did, involving FBI agents, analysis, the Marshal Service, victim advocates, and prosecutors. Multiple co-conspirators have been convicted, but Pratt's sentencing marks the most significant step. Pratt was charged in October 2019, so this has taken a couple of years. Partially because some of that time he had fled the jurisdiction, stuff like that. So there was that. But he was charged in 2019 in the Southern District of California with the sex trafficking crimes in connection with the scheme to deceive and coerce young men or young women. Pratt liquidated his assets and fled the United States in 2019. He was named on the FBI's top most wanted list, which is pretty hilarious. That's how pissed the U.S. government was. They put him on the FBI's 10 most wanted. Holy shit. I mean, the FBI was fucking serious, I guess. And lived as an international fugitive for more than 3 years until he was eventually arrested in Spain in 2022 and finally extradited in March of 2024. So that would be why it took 6 years, because he fled the jurisdiction. It took a while to track him down, and then he fought extradition for a couple of years, and then they brought him back to the United States. They eventually got him. They had to haul his ass back, but they found him. Yeah, they got him. Pratt pled guilty on June the 5th of 2025 to conspiracy to commit sex trafficking by force, fraud, and coercion, and committing sex trafficking by force, fraud, and coercion. He definitely did those things. Prosecutors argued for the longest sentence, given the serious nature of the offense. Pratt has received the longest sentence so far of all the co-conspirators, and we can see the co-conspirators and their respective sentences, none of which are great except for Guy, I guess. Pratt got 27 years. Wolf got 14 years. Garcia got 20 years. Guy over here got a break, I guess, at 4 years. Probably the first one to flip, if you had to guess why. And probably also like just the camera guy or something like that, right? So if you had to guess, he's probably just like the camera guy. And like he's the first one to flip, so of course he gets a break. And Valerie over here, Valerie as a woman is going to be sentenced pretty soon. So that's upcoming. That's exciting. The maximum penalty, of course, was life in prison. The mandatory minimum for the sex trafficking was 15 years. So, yeah. And, trafficking was 15 years. And then, of course, we want to thank all the people that were involved. The FBI, the legal attaché in Spain, San Diego, the Marshal Service, Justice Department of International Affairs, the Spanish National Police, Spain's Ministry of Justice, and the Ministry of the Interior. Very, very exciting. And so that brings us to sort of the end and culmination of the GirlsDoP prawn case. It was pretty fucked up. It was pretty fucked up. You know? Yeah, the threats and the coercion obviously are the thing that's going to most get my attention, right? As a lawyer, right? It's like where I'm trying to find like where the biggest problem is. The biggest problem is, with the I'm going to plow you with drugs and alcohol on the one end, and then I'm going to threaten you in order to make you do this with the extortion, right? Because when you threaten someone to make them do something they don't want to do, that's extortion. And then, of course, when the thing that you're making them do is sex, then it's also, of course, rape. Because when you're making them have sex, that's rape. So it's all those things. Plus, if you weren't making them, also the drugs, which also obliterates their consent, which is also rape. So take your pick of theories of reasons why it's illegal. Which is your favorite reason it's illegal? What is your favorite reason? Is it fraud in the inducement that tricks them into getting to Vegas? Is it like locking them in the room basically and refusing to allow them to leave by putting barriers in between them? Is it the plowing them with the drugs and alcohol? Is it like telling them that, their videos are only going to be seen by some rich asshole in Europe who doesn't exist in the first place, and then but that's false, so you're inducing them, and then you give them a contract to sign which they can't read anyway because they're blissed out of their mind, and then you threaten them because they want to leave, and then you won't let them, and because of sex, and then you basically make them have sex on camera, which you then release the video of. What is your favorite reason that this is to pick from? It's hard to tell. So unsurprisingly, everyone in sight has gone to jail basically forever, except for Guy, who I'm assuming is the camera guy. That's my working assumption. So I'm assuming Theodore Guy was the camera guy with the 4 years and probably the first to flip. But none of these other guys, 14 years and 20 years, 27 years. And Valerie over here is probably not going to have a great time of it either. So that's exciting. So all these people are having a really, really bad day. Plus, of course, the fines out the ass and all their things being seized and so forth and so on. But of course, a lot of women had their lives kind of ruined by this, Yeah. So, because, maybe there were some willing people. I don't know. Again, I wasn't there, right? So of the 600 or so women that were involved in this, maybe there were some willing people, and maybe some people just had second thoughts or whatever. Maybe there were people that were not tricked and deceived. It's possible. I can't speak to every single case, but a lot of them were pretty fucked up. Yeah, I know a lot of them were pretty fucked up. I read a lot of the stuff, from the lawsuit, when it was being done. I'm like, yeah, this was pretty fucked up with the deception and the lies and the one-way ticket and the blocking the door and the drugs and the alcohol and the extortion to have sex, which is rape, and also the alcohol, which obliterates consent, which is also rape, and you're doing it across state lines with the coercion, which is trafficking. It's just all kinds of fucked up. And then, of course, these women, a lot of them have changed their name or changed their appearance or had their lives kind of ruined because, of course, it lives forever. So, sucks, but I guess it's nice that, they got some justice. And I hope the women out there, whoever they are, I hope a lot of them are comforted by the thought that they got some justice in the end for what was done to them. I hope that they are able to, and, yeah. And a lot of those, a lot of that content is obviously no longer available. So, but of course, who can say what's true on the dark web and other places like that? So, yeah. All right. Well, in any event, I'm going to sign off for now. I hope you're having a good one. Thought you like that story. I've been on civil law. Hope all is well. Cheers for now, my friends, and goodbye.